Are you searching for the best in online black radio? Then go to blacktalkradionetwork.com, helping you filter through the noise. Real talk, black talk.
The internet is full of half-truths and all-out lies. We've all seen them, and many people on social media complaining about it. Here's your chance to show and prove. WorldAfropedia.com is a black-owned and operated encyclopedia. There are several thousand articles, but we need help. We can't uncover all the truth ourselves. So please, join us and become a writer, editor, or blogger for WorldAfropedia.com today. Every little bit counts. We owe it to the future generations to put the truth out there. Visit WorldAfropedia.com, the African-centered encyclopedia, a global database of African knowledge for the purpose of bringing about global African wisdom and understanding. WorldAfropedia.com.
It's the nation's capital, it's Washington, D.C. It's the nation's capital. It's the nation's capital. It's the nation's capital. It's Washington, D.C.
The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reported this week that life expectancy in the U.S. is lower now, in part because of the opioid epidemic. The crisis is often portrayed as largely affecting the white rural working class. But one of the places with the highest rates of overdose deaths is right here in Washington, D.C. Here to talk about this is Dr. Tanya Royster. She is director of Washington, D.C.'s Department of Behavioral Health. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Lulu.
Washington, D.C. is behind only West Virginia, Ohio, and Pennsylvania in its rate of overdose deaths. Those are very rural states, whereas D.C. is urban, it's diverse, it's doing very well economically, relatively, or at least certain parts of it are doing well. What's going on here?
We have a unique situation here in the District of Columbia that might mimic some of the rural areas. We have a chronic, long-term heroin user who, with the introduction of the synthetic opioids like fentanyl into the drug supply, are having a higher death rate.
Who is being affected by this?
Our typical death from an opioid overdose is an older African-American male between the age of 40 and 60. So as you see, that's quite different than what's being described around the country.
So can you put that into context for us? Why is that particular community being affected?
Context.
Well, because here in the district, we have not seen the excessive opioid prescribing and the conversion from misuse of opioid prescriptions to heroin on the street, which is the modality of addiction that has been described in other places.
So like a doctor prescribing a painkiller and then those people becoming addicted to the painkillers and then moving on to heroin.
Exactly. What we see here is our chronic user who has been using heroin for 20, 30, 40 years now being affected because of the introduction of fentanyl and other adulterants into the heroin supply.
Yeah, doing some reading into this, heroin's been a big problem here in D.C. for decades. It's affected black men the most. But there really hasn't been a big focus on it by either the media or the government. What does that tell you?
Well, nationally there hasn't been a focus, but certainly here in the district we have been focusing some people would say too much on that population.
Wow! Hey, yo, drama, hold up, son. Hold on. Stop the motherfucking record. Right. I want you to Pondy replay, drama. Pondy replay. Let's give him one more chance, man. Run that shit the fuck back.
Yeah, doing some reading into this, heroin's been a big problem here in D.C. for decades. It's affected black men the most. But there really hasn't been a big focus on it by either the media or the government. What does that tell you?
Well, nationally there hasn't been a focus, but certainly here in the district we have been focusing, some people would say too much on that population. So I think that, the way that I've described it is what's happening here is probably what's happening around the country in smaller pockets. But because 80% of the deaths have been the young white population, everybody else is focusing on their 80%. Well, our 80% here in the district is the older African American male. So I think when the rest of the country gets around to looking at that 20%, that they're going to find a lot of different diverse populations in there.
What do you do with this population of chronic drug users that's being affected? I mean, how do you help them?
So we're reaching out and providing them information and making sure they know that treatment is available and effective. And so we're really providing them direct education about this. We call that approach harm reduction, where we'd like to keep them alive long enough to get them in treatment. We're working with emergency rooms to offer treatment right in the emergency room. If someone has an overdose and survives, that's an opportunity. We're also using peers, people who have survived and are in recovery from opioids and other addictions, that are going out and speaking really in a direct, kind of raw way to current users and saying it's time to make a different choice.
Dr. Tanya Royster is the director of the Department of Behavioral Health here in Washington, D.C. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Context of White Supremacy. Gus T Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date, Thursday, December 6, 2018. So I have been told. This is our weekly book club. Dr. Tommy J. Curry's The Man Not, Race, Class, Genre, and the Dilemmas of Black Manhood. We're picking up in chapter 3, roughly around the halfway point of the text this week. We should have maybe four or five sessions to go in the text. Hope people are getting constructive information. The audio segment that you heard this week, that was reported just a couple of days ago. NPR had multiple segments talking about the life expectancy being lower. Every time that I've heard those reports, somehow there will be an asterisk, a caveat, some little snippet that, oh yes, black males, just black males, have the lowest life expectancy of all. And the same kind of sentiment that you heard there, that that's not really a big deal. Who really cares? One less rapist, mugger in the world. Thank goodness. Pause for Bill Cosby. But I thought, especially in that segment, one of the points that Dr. Curry has made consistently in this text and when he's been on the program, removing black males from study. We've already spent enough time talking about black males. We don't want to hear any more about black males. In that segment, all the hoo-ha about the opioid epidemic, black males, biggest victims in the nation's capital, no less. And it's, we've been talking about that. We don't keep talking about that. Some folks think, we've spent enough time. We got squirrels to think about, and other folks, other people. I mean, sit around and waste all this time. Bill Cosby running around here raping people, and we're supposed to sympathize with black males.
Black brother of hell.
Could have easily switched and played the segment on E.J. Bradford as well. That was the black male that was shot in the back, according to autopsy reports that were released this week. Shot in the back 3 times at a shopping mall in Alabama on Black Friday. Love the black male.
Black brother.
We'll go ahead and get started. The Man Not, Dr. Tommy J. Curry, Context of White Supremacy, audio segment number 1. Little niggers. Elaine Brown's analysis of the super predator mythology. The concrete flux of anti-blackness, those material dynamics of social pressure and anti-black rage that animate policy, police state violence, and white vigilantism are doctrinaire societal obsessions convinced of their desire for the death of black men. The plexus of white supremacism in American society is not a simple naming or practicing of animus against blacks. The lifeline, blood, and sustenance of white supremacy is the physical complacency and nigrophobia that all people in America have of the nigger, the wretched, poor black child, she who mothers them, and he who multiplies. Despite the democratic prose of equality, the reality is that addressing the social equalities as they affect black men and boys requires real structural, psychological, economic, and legal change. As Toby Jenkins remarks, the challenge reflects a societal oxymoron. seeking to advance the status of a population that the larger society has systemically oppressed. On one hand, society espouses rhetoric of concern and desire to elevate black males, but on the other hand, society practices a policy of oppression, prejudice, and disregard. Put differently, the experience of the black man in America seems to be one in which he is called Mr., but is treated with a niggardly regard. And the result is the positioning of black males at the lower rungs of society and their experiencing underachievement in almost all aspects of life. From this oxymoronic state springs contradictory thinking about race and racism that asserts the sociological conditions, the external environmental problems in poor black urban spaces as evidence of a more fundamental and inheritable cultural disposition toward deviance, criminality, and murder. This is the milieu from which Little B, Michael Lewis, springs. Lewis is known to most as an out-of-control thug who killed a man at 13. In 1997, he was arrested for killing Darrell Woods in front of his 2 children and wife. While many activists continue to maintain Lewis's innocence, the issue in which this work is particularly interested is more about the stereotypes of black men and the black community used to justify the wrath of the state and public sentiment used to convict Lewis. The sexualized racist narrative surrounding Little B adamantly asserted that he killed Woods to prove his toughness, his manhood. Because Lewis was a black boy, his journey to manhood was dictated by fulfilling his savage instinct to kill. In the mind of the public, Little B's childhood, the life of a black boy, represented the evilness of black manhood made manifest. There was no exemption from the public. There was no sympathy for him as a child because ultimately he was not a child or even a human. At his core, he was a nigger. Little B was the result of the pathology of the nigger let loose. The warning white America has heralded since slavery. If you give these blacks freedom, they will turn into beasts. Little B was the symbolic proof to the white imagination that a nigger, even a nigger child, must be ruled. Commenting on the repetitiveness of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's describing Little B, a child, as evil, Elaine Brown realized that the term was meant to express a phobia, some sort of primal fear of the beast within, as though Little B were a mythical wolf boy. An editorial in that newspaper argued that Little B was a young killer and that many of these young killers are living outside the bounds of normal social interaction, tiny thugs who kill at the slightest insult or sometimes without any provocation. But the Atlanta Journal-Constitution simply reproduced the decades-long symbolism that marries young black males to criminals. Melissa Harris Barlow's monumental study, Race and the Problem of Crime in Time and Newsweek Cover Stories, 1946 to 1995, argues that crime began to be racialized in the current form in the 1960s when criminals began to be equated with young black males. As a reaction to the push from the black community for civil and political rights, a national campaign was launched by a cover story in Newsweek in March 1965 that sought to make crime generally synonymous with black men specifically. the ideological work done to solidify the connection between crime and the young black male in the mid-1960s defined the discourse about race for decades to come and marked an important dimension of the shift from traditional to modern symbolic racism. This modern racism fixated on the criminality of the young black male facilitated the public consent for the extreme levels of coercive control applied to a substantial proportion of the African American population. It is here that we see the levels of violence that spelled death and ruin for blacks in America being justified as sanctions against black communities in an effort to control both the deviant impulse and the birth of young black males. The ideology that started as a reaction to the political and economic mobilization quickly became a core belief of American society, eventually seeking to be validated by various conjectures in the social sciences. In 1995, John DeUlio coined the term superpredator to describe the burgeoning crime wave due to young black males. In The Coming of the Superpredators, he argued that a crime wave was coming and that, while the trouble will be greatest in black inner-city neighborhoods, other places are also certain to have burgeoning youth crime problems that will spill over into upscale central city districts, inner ring suburbs, and even the rural heartland. DeUlio meshed the myths of scientific racism with a post-civil rights America focused on culture and environment to persuade a 20th century American public that this was really not about race, but about the cultural failures and moral poverty of poor urban communities. According to DeUlio, moral poverty is the poverty of being without loving, capable, responsible adults who teach you right from wrong. It is the poverty of being without parents and other authorities who habituate you to feel joy at others' joy, pain at others' pain, happiness when you do right, remorse when you do wrong. At the extremity of moral poverty, however, DeUlio presents blackness, unnamed but visible, through the imagery of a problem people identified by the raw concepts of their social condition. He says, in the extreme, moral poverty is the poverty of growing up surrounded by deviant, delinquent, and criminal adults in abusive, violence-ridden, fatherless, godless, and jobless settings. Despite attempts to pitch this theory as non-racial and scientific, DeUlio ultimately identifies his target, the young black male, and warns, not only is the number of young black criminals likely to surge, but also the black crime rate, both black on black and black on white, is increasing so that as many as half of those juvenile super predators could be young black males. DeUlio's attack on black men and boys is foundationally based in the view that all that's left of the black community in some pockets of urban America is deviant, delinquent, and criminal adults surrounded by severely abused and neglected children, virtually all of whom were born out of wedlock. Like the analysis offered by Angela Davis concerning the myth of the black rapist, these theories show how the stereotypes of black men and boys as predators are symbiotic to the racist sexual mythology concerning black women and girls, both of which pathologize the whole black community. Just as DeUlio depicts black men and boys as stone-cold predators, he depicts the black mother, and by extension the black community, as neglectful and dangerous, since The abject moral poverty that creates super predators begins very early in life in homes where unconditional love is nowhere but unmerciful abuse is common. This theme of black pathology gets scientific language toward the end of 1996 in the book Body Count, Moral Poverty, and How to Win America's War Against Crime and Drugs, which argues that black urban spaces are best understood as criminogenic communities or places where the social forces that create predatory criminals are far more numerous than the social forces that create decent, law-abiding citizens. The problem, according to D'Ulio and his co-authors, is that most inner-city children grow up surrounded by teenagers and adults who are themselves deviant, delinquent, or criminal. Although D'Ulio rejected his super predator thesis years later, the language and imagery of the black super predator remains imprinted on the nation's collective psyche, as does the violent mythology of the black communities from which these black men and boys come. Internalized vulnerabilities, black male vulnerability among other blacks. While there can be no denial of the prevalence and destruction caused by white violence against black men and boys, it is not the only dynamic that threatens black male life. In black communities, black men and boys are also victims of domestic and sexual abuse at rates far higher than those of their white male counterparts. Black males are thought to be too dangerous to actually be victims of domestic and sexual violence. While conversations concerning police brutality or racism are common, albeit misunderstood, there is rarely any attention to the ways in which sexual and domestic violence affect black men in their own communities. The hyper-masculine stereotypes of black males make it almost unfathomable for many onlookers to see black men and boys as victims of women's violence or rage. And in those few instances that such conversations become somewhat possible, they are mischaracterized as an irrelevant phenomenon that ultimately deflects from the prevalence of female domestic and sexual abuse. In reality, black men and boys suffer physical and sexual abuse from men and women within their communities. This fact remains unacknowledged in current academic disciplines governed by the calculus of identity, since any centering of the black male, even when addressing his specific experiences and dynamics of trauma, are deemed to be unjustified. He is simply the wrong body, thought to be undeserving of the position as subject. Typical of the ways in which black men are overdetermined by the corpse, the dead black male body, conversations concerning abuse of black males have been erased altogether under current theorizations of black masculinity. In other words, the only oppression black males can have is the death caused by racism. Since domestic and sexual violence exceed the limits of this conceptual boundary, it is not seen. It is thought to be non-existent and irrelevant to our current understanding of black men and boys. Historically, black men have been well represented as victims of both intimate partner violence and intimate partner homicide in government reports since the 1970s. Recording intimate partner homicide, IPH, among blacks, the gender ratio was below 1 prior to the mid-1980s, as fewer black females than black males were murdered by intimate partners. By the mid-1990s, the ratio reached 1.5 black female victims for every black male. In fact, between 1976 and 1989, more black men were killed by their wives than black women were killed by their husbands. After 1990, the order was reversed and the murder rate among black wives and ex-wives was higher than that among black husbands and ex-husbands. Overall, black communities endure higher rates of intimate partner violence, IPV, than white communities, as both black men and black women are more likely to experience domestic violence than their white counterparts. Reporting for the U.S. Department of Justice, Callie Renison and Sarah Welkins observed that blacks were victimized by intimate partners at significantly higher rates than persons of any other race between 1993 and 1998. Black females experienced intimate partner violence at a rate 35% higher than that of white females and about 2.5 times the rate of women of other races. Black males experienced intimate partner violence at a rate about 62% higher than that of white males and about 2.5 times the rate of men of other races. The National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey 2010 makes a similar case for considering black men as victims of intimate partner violence. According to the report, while an estimated 40.9% of black women, or roughly 6 million black women, will experience some form of intimate partner violence in their lifetime, 36.8, or about 4.6 million black men will as well. The historical patterns of black male victimization and death are often left out of the narratives concerning the nature of domestic violence to sustain the almost exclusive focus currently held by gender theorists on women as victims and men as perpetrators. Contrary to contemporary theory, which insists on masculinity as the sole cause of domestic abuse, intimate partner violence, and intimate partner homicide in the black community, like that in the white community, is heavily correlated with the concentration of poverty in these areas. In reality, black men and women are subjected to this kind of violence. It is not simply patriarchal, as if it were perpetrated exclusively by males. Intimate partner violence is an extension of the violence found in neglected communities, which enters homes through the psychology and interpersonal relationships of men and women affected by economic, political, and various other environmental traumas. Efforts to center black male victims in discussions of intimate partner violence are often cast as erasure of the real victims of domestic abuse, women. Often, attempts to discuss the suffering of black males, whether they are husbands, boyfriends, or children, are dismissed as irrelevant to the more important issue of black women's victimization by men. Among scholars, male and female, a belief exists that if a black man is attacked by a black woman, he deserves it, or because he is male, it is his obligation to de-escalate female aggression toward him, even if it means he is physically or verbally assaulted in the process. These reactions are the outgrowth of a deeply held conviction that men are the perpetrators, not the victims of domestic violence. In liberal arts disciplines, domestic violence is thought of almost exclusively as patriarchal violence. In fact, Bell Hooks has argued that the term domestic violence should be replaced with patriarchal violence because it continually reminds the listener that violence in the home is linked to sexism and sexist thinking to male domination. Often, the humanities appeal to intuitive observations and personal experience to supplement empirical study and evidence as in the social sciences. The effect of such appeals, however, in the case of underreported or unpopular phenomena, can contribute to the further marginality and invisibility of social practices. Academic fields continue to discount the rates and consequences of domestic abuse and violence on the psychology and personhood of black males. simply because the epistemic traditions of these disciplines allow evidence to be discounted for personal experience. Under this schema, if the speaker has not seen black men or boys abused, then there is a case for suggesting black men and boys are not abused, or that they are not abused to an extent that is significant enough to warrant discussion as a social problem similar in magnitude to the abuse of women. These conversations function as an extension of disciplinary politics rather than the prevalence of intimate partner violence and intimate partner homicide throughout society. It is common for domestic violence to be used as evidence for establishing patriarchy as the political dividing line between black men and women, as well for black women's needs of feminist politics concerned with their particular vulnerability due to their race and gender. Very little discussion of race and intimate partner violence deals with the mental, economic, or environmental causes of these conflicts or the populations identified by the National Crime Victimization Survey's qualitative reports of abuse. These discourses assume that ending domestic violence against women is a matter of eliminating toxic masculinities and patriarchy instead of ameliorating the conditions in which these populations find themselves or improving their access to mental health or substance abuse treatment. Intimate partner violence and homicide and sexual violence against black men and boys offer evidence that our understanding of the oppression of black males also has an ideological dimension that is internalized not only by the larger white society, but also by members of their own racial group. These internalized vulnerabilities, so to speak, make black men potential victims of all those who engage them. Because society dehumanizes black men and boys, constructing them as invulnerable to offense, individuals recognize that there is little punishment for taking violent action against this group. Internalizing black male vulnerabilities is not about individuals simply believing stereotypes about black males. It is about how individuals are socialized to understand that society's conceptualization of black males as criminal and savage empowers anyone to act against black men and boys without fear of punishment. Internalizing the vulnerable social positions of populations, as in the case of black men, offers individuals a providential rationale for committing violence or acting against individuals from groups that society thinks of as evil in the flesh. The pervasiveness of misandric myths about black men has allowed stereotypes and antipathies to be internalized throughout society without question. Within the consciousness of individuals, internalized vulnerability exists as an almost intuitive knowledge of the fungibility of black males in society, so that the social or personal relation or contact an individual has with a black male offers a level of power over that black male body. Since black males can never be victims, other individuals, even other blacks and minorities, have the power to abuse, exploit, or rape them without fear of sanction. In other words, the dehumanization of black men and boys generally by society gives individuals explicit permission to dehumanize them as well. In this sense, perpetrators of violence against black males are not guilty of any crimes at all. They are simply participating in the subjugation of non-human things that have no moral status or empathy in the larger society, especially in the case of personal or intimate partner violence. Duluth no more, the ideology and politics behind the patriarchal thesis. In Education Groups for Men Who Batter, the Duluth model, Ellen Pence and Michael Paymar, the inventors of the model, argued that treating men who batter their partners is not a neutral endeavor. In the Duluth program, each facilitator conducts a group within a community, a program, and a personal philosophical framework that either supports a man's process of change toward nonviolence or reinforces his dominance over the woman he batters. Theory guides practice, say Pence and Paymar, and their theory is simple. Men are culturally prepared for their role of master of the home, even though they must enforce the right to exercise this role. They are socialized to be dominant and women to be submissive. The Duluth model holds that men need not intend to batter women. It is an automatic, almost unconscious response, part of the programming men are taught in their families of origins and through their experiences in a culture that teaches men to dominate. Many clinicians and psychologists, however, adamantly disagree with this model. For example, Donald Dutton has argued that intervention systems like the Duluth model were focused on confronting sexist attitudes or male entitlement. The problem was that there was no evidence that batterers had sexist attitudes. In addition, Kenneth Corvo, a professor of social work, maintains, in spite of strong and consistent clinical and ideological linkages, the Duluth model views substance abuse as almost irrelevant in the perpetration of domestic violence. While gender scholars in the humanities have continued to insist that there is an intuitive link between domestic violence and patriarchy, clinicians have offered study after study demonstrating that there is little clinical or ideological evidence to support the claim that domestic abuse is solely the province of patriarchy or that men abuse because of psychological or psychoanalytic disposition toward domination. Histories of previous abuse, addiction, and mental health are so highly correlated to incidents of partner violence that it is negligent to ignore these factors in the incidence of intimate partner violence. In fact, the noted psychologist Denise Hines maintains that it is precisely these factors, previous abuse, drug and substance abuse, and mental health, that explain the almost symmetrical rates of abuse perpetrated by women against men in the general population. Perhaps the greatest irony concerning the Duluth model is that one of the founders, Ellen Pence, admitted that the weakness of the program was that it lacked clinical findings to support the theory that patriarchy was the cause of domestic abuse. In the subsequent article, Some Thoughts on Philosophy, Pence explains, although the DAIP, Domestic Abuse Intervention Programs, staff has argued against using casual explanations that require practitioners to assume a fairly universal psychological makeup among batterers, i.e., stress or anger control problems, we have developed some of our own truisms that also reduce complex social relationships to slogans. One was the notion that batterers use violence, coercion, and intimidation to control their partners. As Pence says, he does it for power. He does it for control. He does it because he can. These were advocacy jingles that, in our opinion, said just about all there was to say. Pence conveys that these jingles supplanted the need or search for evidence. By determining that the need or desire for power was the motivating force behind battering, we created a conceptual framework that, in fact, did not fit the lived experience of many of the men and women we were working with. Like those we were criticizing, we reduced our analysis to a psychological universal truism. Despite the incongruity of their theory to the lives and actual motivations of abusers, Pence and Pamela successfully established a male psychologism that would come to establish the motivation men had for abuse and define women as the sole victims of this kind of violence. According to Pence, the Duluth model was never meant to explain the actual cases or circumstances of domestic violence. It was about imposing the ideological stance of the model and its staff, and that meant ignoring violence between same-sex couples and violence committed by women against men. Cases of domestic abuse that did not fit their theory were simply dismissed as irrelevant to the ideological commitments of the Duluth Project. Pence explains, "It was the cases themselves that created the chink in each of our theoretical suits of armor. Speaking for myself, I found that many of the men I interviewed did not seem to articulate a desire for power over their partner, although I relentlessly took every opportunity to point out to men in the groups that they were so motivated and merely in denial. The fact that few men ever articulated such a desire went unnoticed by me and many of my coworkers. Eventually, we realized that we were finding what we had already predetermined to find. The DAIP staff were interpreting what men seemed to expect or feel entitled to as a desire. When we had to start explaining women's violence toward their partners, lesbian violence, and the violence of men who did not like what they were doing, we were brought back to our original, undeveloped thinking that the violence is rooted in how social relationships, for example, marriage, and the rights people feel entitled to within them are socially, not privately, constructed." Pence admits that ideology, rather than careful empirical studies, formed the philosophical foundation of the Duluth paradigm. "We all engaged in ideological practices and claimed them to be neutral observations," writes Pence. In its earliest formulation, Duluth was solely committed to the criminalization of male perpetrators, even while realizing that the criminal justice system did not effectively change the social norms that were most responsible for intimate partner violence. Pence's comments on Duluth's paradigm have had little effect on how liberal arts disciplines account for intimate partner violence and intimate partner homicide. The deliberate exclusion of violence committed by women against men and children by Pence and early gender theorists following her model has been moralized away as anti-woman or victim blaming rather than a serious challenge to how one conceptualizes violence within the home or intimate relationships. Ultimately, the validity and soundness of the theory has seemed to be irrelevant to its adoption in the humanities as an explanatory model of male aggression and black males' compensatory motivations for violence. The premises of this model have sustained decades of work and legitimized assumptions thought to explain intimate partner violence in black communities. Contrary to the dominant view of domestic abuse in the black community articulated by authors such as Bell Hooks and Kimberly Crenshaw, who maintain the validity of the patriarchal thesis, Duluth model, multiple social scientists, social workers, and psychologists have shown that the causes of intimate partner violence and intimate partner homicide cannot be culturally universalized to the black community. For example, Carolyn West, a noted black feminist psychologist, argues that intimate partner violence, victimization, and perpetration can involve men and women of every race, ethnicity, age, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, and relationship status, including married, cohabitating, and dating couples. In this view, domestic violence is an outgrowth of conflict between people in which either or both can be perpetrators and victims simultaneously. This view of domestic violence is particularly sensitive to the ways that previous research has built theories and claims from the study of only white heterosexual couples and sought to universalize such findings across all groups. Because of the large number of whites reporting incidents of abuse and constituting the subjects of research, many researchers have thought it legitimate not only to generalize their findings to all groups, but also to focus primarily on the unilateral aspects of intimate partner violence. However, when one evaluates the rates of intimate partner violence among Black, Asian, Hispanic, and Indigenous men and women, few gender differences in rates of physical and psychological aggression are found. Bidirectional abuse and intimate partner violence against Black men. In sharp contrast to the white community, in Black communities, intimate partner violence was found to be exceptionally defined by bidirectionality. Various studies have found that Black cosmologies of womanhood, vulnerability of females, and violence differ greatly from those of whites. While unilateral violence occurred at higher rates among Black males and females than in the white population, in Black households, mutual violence was most frequently reported. The rate of self-reported bidirectional intimate partner violence, 61%, was 2 times that of unidirectional female-to-male partner violence, 31%, and about 6 times higher than unidirectional male-to-female partner violence, 8%. As the epidemiologist Nikki Palmetto clarifies, a bidirectional violent relationship signifies that both partners perpetrate violence in a given relationship, not necessarily within each violent episode. In Black communities, there is no fixed perpetrator or victim. Black men and women can be both simultaneously and often are. In this sense, bidirectionality signals that Black intimate partner violence is rooted in mutual victimization and violence. These patterns consequently socialize men, women, and children into cycles of mutual conflict in which perpetrators cannot be clearly marked. As the epidemiologist Raul Catino, the public health scholar Sushani Mickler, and the clinical psychologist Craig Field remark, the influence of Black ethnicity on the occurrence of bidirectional partner violence appears to be independent of education, income, employment status, drinking, alcohol problems, and history of violence in the family of origin. While we know that the aforementioned environmental stressors increase the probability of intimate partner violence, something else is operating in the Black community that particularizes intimate violence as bidirectional. A major obstacle to the recognition of Black male victims of intimate partner violence and intimate partner homicide is the stereotype that Black men who are the intimate partners of Black women are most responsible for their deaths. The most publicly debated example of this racist myth occurred in 2009 surrounding a speech on domestic violence by Attorney General Eric H. Holder Jr. In the speech, Holder claimed, disturbingly, intimate partner homicide is the leading cause of death for African American women ages 15 to 45. In his defense, Holder did not pull the statistic out of thin air. The claim that intimate partner homicide was the leading cause of death for Black women, and, by implication, that Black men made up the vast majority of perpetrators, was commonly made in peer-reviewed domestic violence literature and government reports, including the National Institute of Justice Journal, throughout the 2000s. Ultimately, however, the claimed statistic could not be verified as fact and consequently was revised and excised from several reports and publications as an error. The 2003 issue of the National Institute of Justice Journal was revised on March 11, 2014 to say homicide is a leading cause of death in the United States among young African American women aged 15 to 45 years. And the Department of Justice website now includes a disclaimer and an explanatory note to Holder's speech that reads, "These remarks, as originally delivered in 2009, cited a statistic naming intimate partner homicide as the leading cause of death for African American women ages 15 to 45. This statistic was drawn from a range of reputable sources, including a 2003 study by the National Institute of Justice. However, recent figures indicate other causes of death, including cancer and heart disease, outrank intimate partner homicide for this age group. It is one thing to point out the mistakes of peer-reviewed articles regarding misrepresentation of facts or errors of citations in government reports, but the life of this statistic concerning the implied danger black men pose to black women is a different species of concern." Holder's claim about intimate partner homicide was believable because when it was stated as a gender proposition, it disarmed the resistance many social scientists and scholars felt toward racist stereotypes of black men as dangerous and violent and allowed them ultimately to accept it as fact. This fantastic statistic took on a life of its own and gained fastidity based on a consensus among academics and the public that black men are, in fact, violent and thereby real threats to women in their communities. It is easily shown via a cursory examination of the Centers for Disease Control's reports that intimate partner violence simply could not be the leading cause of death of black women. Intimate partner homicide is a subset of homicides committed in a given year. From 1998 to 2013, homicide ranked second to unintentional injuries for young black women aged 15 to 24, while black women within the average age of marriage, 24 to 44, were less likely to die from homicide generally. Among black women aged 24 to 44, homicide ranged from the fourth to the seventh most likely cause of death. Thus, contrary to the idea that black men are dangerous as spouses and intimate partners, the threat of homicide as a leading cause of death diminished among black women in this age group. Black female perpetrators of domestic violence are not uncommon in the black community. This should come as no surprise, given that male victims of domestic violence are not as rare as gender theorists usually assert. Various community studies and self-reporting surveys indicate some agreement between black men and women regarding the rates of intimate partner violence perpetrated by females. We see headlines of such occurrences constantly across various media platforms, but we do not respond because we are culturally conditioned not to see or sympathize with black male victims of such abuse. On July 31, 2015, Alexis Stanton was charged with assault after pouring hot grits on a man and then beating him with a bat. On August 6, 2015, Barvetta Singletary, an aide to President Obama, shot at her boyfriend with his own gun for allegedly having an affair. Most notably, the singer Ray J was beaten by his girlfriend, Princess Love, sustaining a torn ligament, fractured ribs, and a busted lip. On September 29, 2015, Natalie Chase Robinson was arrested for throwing bleach in her boyfriend's face, covering him with alcohol, and setting him on fire. When black males are victimized by women, society, and even black academics, male and female, take the incidents to be comical. Despite the moralizations condemning domestic violence, Throughout society, there is a failure to see women as perpetrators. However, to truly address domestic violence, scholars and practitioners must come to recognize that women's violence needs to be understood as a part of the picture of domestic violence, as it may be a key aspect of more effective prevention and intervention strategies for intimate partner violence. Like his victimization at the hands of the larger white society, the black male's victimization by women is explained away by suggesting that black males are so dangerous and violent that they could not possibly be victims, or that they deserve the violence imposed on them. Case studies and statistics offering proof of black male victims of bidirectional abuse or abuse perpetrated unilaterally by females in the black community are often explained away by appealing to the obviousness of black male aggression and violence toward black women. Routinely, the revelation of black women as perpetrators of domestic violence against black men is met with the retort that women attack or kill black men in self-defense. While authors have proposed this explanation for higher rates of bidirectionality within various literatures, it has never been confirmed as true among female abusers. Not knowing the reason behind certain phenomena is not a reason for theorists to retreat into racist stereotypes about black males' violent disposition toward women. This bias among gender theorists not only erases black male suffering and death at the hands of intimate partners, but also erroneously establishes patterns of thinking suggesting that, despite the overrepresentation of African American male victims of domestic violence and female perpetrated homicides, males alone are responsible for intimate violence and are not themselves harmed by abuse. While nothing could be farther from the truth when considering the actual rates of black male victims of intimate partner violence and intimate partner homicide, black masculinity theories often lack such substance regarding black males. What currently passes as theory not only ignores the prevalence of bidirectionality in the black community, but also suggests that black male victims are morally irrelevant to our understanding and condemnation of intimate partner violence. Current explanations of the role race plays in intimate partner violence systematically erase the numbers of black male victims in the mind of the theorist, conceptualized as contradictions to the intuitive gender hierarchies established by our understanding of the masculine as perpetrating and the feminine as victimized. Black male victims of intimate partner violence and intimate partner homicide are said to either not exist or not matter to the discussion at hand. This conceptualization of black males is dehumanizing because it insists that their suffering does not deserve to occupy a moment of our consideration as something real. Black males are told they can only be perpetrators of violence and remain unseen by gender theory as anything more, since their reality requires the recognition of female perpetrators. Ignoring their pain and suffering simply because they are black men or because they are abused by black women solidifies the racist regime of society in theory. These racist logics maintain that the black male can only be criminal, only danger, only threat. He cannot be human, vulnerable, or victim, especially to a black woman. Liberal arts scholars need to understand domestic violence in the black community as more than proof of a predetermined biocentric theory of black male pathology. Multiple clinicians and public health scholars have concluded that decades of research into domestic violence in the black community provides no support for a conclusion that African Americans have an inherent biological or cultural propensity for violence. Rather, the stressors and oppressive systemic forces that disproportionately affect African Americans place them at greater risk for domestic violence. As such, there is no evidentiary basis to insist that black maleness or toxic masculinity is casually related to the high incidence of domestic violence among blacks. Domestic abuse is a problem of conflict that risks the death and injury of black men, women, and children. Just as intimate partner violence perpetrated by males is associated with injury or death, so too must we confront the prevalence and danger of violence perpetrated by females. Male victims of female-perpetrated violence suffer from physical injury and disfigurement, depression, anxiety, and in some cases, death, just as their female counterparts do. Furthermore, domestic violence in the home creates a nexus of trauma that leads to concrete harm against both men and women and socializes young black boys and girls into similar patterns of intimate violence as adults. As West remarks, exposure to childhood violence in the form of being the victim of child physical abuse or witnessing domestic violence in the family of origin also has been associated with higher rates of intimate partner violence among Hispanic and African American men, women, and couples. We can no longer conceptualize intimate partner violence as perpetrated solely by males in the black community. We need theoretical frames that engage intimate partner violence bidirectionally and ecologically to better understand this phenomenon and its consequences among blacks.
Context of White Supremacy. Gus T Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date, Thursday, December 6th, first segment of our book club, Dr. Tommy J. Curry. We get back to the second audio segment, we'll pick up on Not Wanted and Not Cared For, Sexual Abuse and the Rape of Young Black Boys. That'll be audio segment 2. Number, if you have questions, thoughts, comments on the first audio segment, 641-715-3640. The code 564-943#. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. Number again, 641-715-3640. The code 564-943#. Press star 61 if you would like to join. You can drop an email as well, untiljustice@gmail.com, untiljustice@gmail.com. And I can read your commentary, or if you have a question that you would like to submit, we can share our thoughts as we proceed. I wrote on Facebook and I think Twitter when I was announcing the broadcast that on this week that E.J. Bradford, the autopsy, that he was shot in the back, Kareem Hunt, fired by the Kansas City Chiefs, suspended by the NFL for the conflict that he had with a white woman. In fact, I read the article on the compensatory call-in this past weekend where they said he bull rushed this white woman. How often do you hear that verb? And, of course, George H.W. Bush, President 41, they say, passed away. They had the funeral, all the pomp and circumstance. And I've said consistently, Willie Horton, that's who I'm going to talk about for the duration that they mention George H.W. I've seen many reports that have stated he would not have been president were it not for his ads on Willie Horton, the black beast, nigger, rapist, Willie Horton. But if folks see any parallels between those stories and the report that we started, which was the report that aired at the very beginning of the broadcast on the opioid abuse in the nation's capital. That was from this week as well. All 4 different reports right in line with the man knot, unless I am really misconstruing Dr. Curry's work. First few folks who dialed in, if you have thoughts, observations, questions, line should be open. Proceed.
Oh, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. How you doing, Gus? Just to add to also George Bush, also the infamous menacing Negro who sold crack cocaine right across the street from the White House. That kind of also intensified the war on black males, the war on drugs. We can add that to George Bush's legacy. I had some other things I wanted to say, but I'm kind of lost right now. Let me just get my thoughts together and come back.
Oh, no. No problem if you need to take time. Other folks who dialed in with a hand up, proceed.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
All right, greetings, Gus, and greetings to all the callers and listeners. This is Henry from Chicago. John Delulio, I guess that's how you pronounce his name, coined the term super predator as on page 113, made actually very popular by one Hillary Clinton. I get into these debates about, Hillary Clinton being a refined racist. I think she's an outright racist, if you ask me. Probably as bad as Donald Trump. So super predator, and also his commentary on this thing he calls moral poverty, and I guess in this quote he says, in the extreme moral poverty is the poverty of growing up surrounded by deviant, delinquent, and criminal adults in abusive, violent, ridden, fatherless, godless, and jobless settings. And I'm pretty sure he's directing this towards black neighborhoods, but he seems to fail to understand that this poverty is caused by the racist society that puts these black folks into these particular situations. And not very truthful in this, because he also said godless. And I'm pretty sure there's hundreds of churches in the black community. So why does he call it godless? So I didn't get that part neither. As I was listening to and reading also in regards to males being victims of domestic violence, I thought about Tiger Woods and cowbell, but Tiger Woods being married to that white woman, and I remember during the time when they were going through that divorce, she attacked him, and I remember everybody cheering her on, saying, "Yay, yay, you go, girl," and it was just like ridiculous. And it's like I said, I'm just, that was just like a very extreme case, because obviously, white women, are the, along with white men, are the purveyors of, racism, white supremacy. So, nobody's going to blame them for attacking black males, because, obviously in the text, black males are, they're not human. even somebody like Tiger Woods, who is probably the best golfer of all time. That's all I have right now. I'll mute my line.
Much obliged, sir. Others who dialed in, if you have a hand up, line should be open. Proceed.
Can I be heard?
Greetings, retired firefighter.
Greetings, Gus, and everybody else that's on the broadcast. Be patient with me, please, because I don't have a book, and it's already difficult enough with a book. But from what I gather, and based on what I think some of the comments that you were making, as well as I think I don't know if it was a question or not, but anyway, I'll just say that yes, white people have used black males in their racist narrative. It's actually it's an old, as you know, it's an old code, very old code, in order to assist them from propaganda standpoint anyway, to assist them into maintaining the system of racism, white supremacy, because what it does, it encourages white people to practice racism more and more, and they have a built-in narrative to say, well, it's because of those real bad Negro males